welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hi, welcome to Syosset Library's Turn the Page podcast. My name is Jessica. I am your host today, and I'm here with the author of a book about a really sweet teacher who just wants to do the best for her students and is completely selfless and has no ulterior motives ever, right?
Not exactly.
Welcome, Lisa Borders. Tell us about last night at the disco.
I'm laughing because the idea for the book came from a teacher I had once who actually was a really sweet teacher, but the character in the book is not at all sweet.
So you had a good teacher that you based Lynda Boyle on. How did that work?
So first of all, I always feel like I need to put the caveat out there that she's not really based on Lynda Boyle. Lynda Boyle is not based on my teacher, but there is a story I heard about this teacher that caused me to create Lynda Boyle. So the story was I had this very beautiful, very glamorous teacher when I was in seventh grade. And occasionally I had her for first period and she would be late and sort of a lot more often than some of the other teachers. Many years later, decades later, I became friendly with another of my former teachers from my junior high school. And we were talking a little bit about how all the teachers I had had in seventh and eighth grade, they were all very young. They were all in their 20s and 30s, which you don't realize when you're a kid that age. You just sort of think, they're all adults, so they're all old, right? Hadn't really occurred to me that they were all young, but when I thought back on it, of course they were. And he said that like some of them would go out clubbing in the city. And this particular teacher who used to be late for first period would go to Studio 54 and sometimes not make it back until the next morning. So she would drive like directly from the city to school to teach. And as soon as I heard that, I just thought I have to do something with that. It's just too wonderful a thing to think about. But this teacher was very sweet and a very good teacher. So I feel like I have to put that out there. So Last Night at the Disco is narrated by Lynda Boyle, a legend in her own mind. The book largely takes place in 1977, but she tells it from the vantage point of 4 decades later. So she's looking back on her life. In 1977, she was an eighth grade English teacher at a school in a working class town in New Jersey, very similar to a town in New Jersey where I grew up. She goes to Studio 54 at night and dreams of a much more glamorous life where she brushes elbows with celebrities, and she does actually brush elbows with celebrities, but she
Elbows and other things.
that's true. Sometimes not just elbows. She thinks those encounters are much more significant than they actually are. And she believes she discovers two musicians. She does, in fact, become briefly close to two musicians who later become famous. But 40 years later, she thinks that she discovered them, and she decides to tell her story so that people understand what really happened back in the late 70s.
And she's telling it through an email.
Yes, so the event that really sets her off is she sees a Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction. And one of her students, who is one of the musicians, inducts this musician, Johnny Engel, who was a man she had a crush on at one time. And she thinks she dated him. I don't think he would consider that they actually dated. She sees this induction, and then there's a little notice in Rolling Stone that briefly mentions Lynda's name because there was an incident at Studio 54, which I won't go into detail about because it's the climactic incident of the book and it has lots of spoilers. But she basically has to leave the tri-state area after that. So she is briefly mentioned. Nobody knows where she is. She's very upset that the article doesn't talk about how she discovered Johnny and her student Aura. And so she decides to fire off an email to Jan Wenner, the founder and former publisher of Rolling Stone magazine, to set the record straight.
She is, like you said, a legend in her own mind. And it's really just sort of, I don't even know. It's like you're trying to sort of sort through her mental gymnastics where she's very clearly doing everything for herself, but acting like this is in the best interest of this person who she quote unquote discovered. And Aura is a child, and a very talented child at that, but she's also grieving her father. And there's just so much like, man, there's so much that there's so much that this woman does. And she's just like relentless in her pursuit of certain things. And then there's also Johnny, who she pursues in a different way, relentlessly. For Aura, while she says that she wants to help her develop her talent, Lynda she very much wants to be a poet, and she hasn't made it in that sense, so she sees the connections that Aura has that way. But then Johnny is like her love affair in her head.
Right.
Yeah, and it's just like this collision course with all of these people around her while she's trying to get what she wants.
Yeah, I think, one of the things that was challenging for me that that it sounds from what you're saying like it all came through was that there's a very serious story buried under Linda's narrative. Aura is going through a lot with her father's death. Johnny is going through a lot in his new life in New York, trying to become a musician. And if the book were told from either of their perspectives, it would be a fairly serious novel, especially if it were from Aura's perspective. And I really care about them as characters, and I am sorry that I had to throw them in with Lynda sometimes. But I had a lot of fun trying to show their characters to the reader through Lynda's eyes, because Lynda does not see anything clearly.
Right, she doesn't. And it's just sort of like almost like a precursor to the 80s,
Mm.
this me generation. And I believe at one point that kind of comes in the book. Um, so that actually does lead me to a question about why that particular period in time, why Studio 54, and why was Lynda the one who had to tell the story? And was that because she wouldn't stop talking about herself when you sat down to write this?
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. So first of all, for a very long time, I wanted to set something in that time period, in that place and time, because New York in the late 70s, there was this collision of a variety of different musical forms that I think are all amazing. And I mean, I think one of the for anyone who's read the book, it's called Last Night at the Disco, but there are lots of other musical genres in there. There's punk rock, there's glam rock. It's not really just about disco. Disco is what the narrator's interested in, but many of the other characters are interested in other forms of music. And I am certainly much more of like a punk rock, post-punk person than I am a disco person. Although um, I am roughly Aura's age. So I was old enough to be aware that all of this music was happening, but just a little too young to access it because I didn't have a cool teacher that was trying to sidle up to me because she thought that I could help her with her poetry career. And, I didn't have any kind of I mean, there were 14, 15-year-olds at Studio 54 if they were famous or well connected, but, I did not have those kinds of connections. So I was just seeing all this stuff happen from afar. and but not that far. So it was something that kind of tantalized me, and I always wanted to write about it. And I think there was a second part to your question that I think I lost the thread of.
Um, Linda, why is she the one who gets to tell the story?
Yeah.
And is it because the character wouldn't stop talking about herself when you sat down to write this?
Yeah, and I mean that's actually a very good way to put it. So I tried to tell this story from every possible point of view. I wasn't at first convinced that I was going to write an unreliable narrator. I tried writing it from Johnny's point of view. I tried writing it from Aura's point of view, and it was kind of dead on the page. Like it just wasn't that exciting. And I had not initially intended for Linda to be quite as narcissistic as she is. But when I started writing her voice, all of a sudden it came to life. She came to life for me, the voice came to life, and I think at first I was a little afraid of it because I thought, boy, this is going to be hard to pull off and have the reader still kind of want to hang with her for all these pages. But it was just so much fun to write her that I decided to go with it. And I kind of never looked back after that.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think, you know, no matter, she really is, I mean, she's really something. And I think like she's what people would have called, and I don't know, like they call a real piece of work, I think,
Yes, yes.
right?
I would describe her as a real piece
A
of
real
work.
piece of work. But I do see that it would not have been as, I mean, it is, aside from the fact that she's pretty awful, it's funny, it is funny just listening, and reading this and then watching the way it all plays out, even though it is sad and tragic at the same time.
Yeah.
But Linda won't talk about that because the real tragedy is that nobody is acknowledging her brilliance and her life was ruined because of this thing. And now she gets to see other people live on in success where she's not doing that. So, that is a very different story. And I mean, look, there is a lot of grounds to cover when you're covering a real piece of work, or not even just an unreliable narrator, like a narrator who's not particularly likable to anybody but themselves.
Yeah.
Um, and it makes for a very interesting story, which this definitely was.
Well, thank you. My goal when I was writing it was for the reader to kind of root for Linda despite themselves. And I think from what I've heard from readers, I think I mostly succeeded in that. Although, to be fair, there are reviews on Goodreads where people said, I just did not like this person and couldn't get into it. But I had many more reviews where people said, I didn't think I was going to be able to care about this person, but I had a ball reading this. So
Yeah.
it, it definitely depends on your perspective. I do have sympathy and empathy for Linda, and I think maybe that comes through and also makes her slightly more likable. I think I see her as kind of a tragic figure because if she had a little more self-awareness, I actually think her life would have turned out better.
Well, I mean, it's like when you say, or when you hear about people, and it's like if they're given the right direction, she could have channeled a lot of that into something else
Yeah.
that could have given her some success, or at least at the, not been so toxic. And I think there's so many factors that go into it. There's the way that women were raised back in those days, and even now. There's, the way that, parenting in general and just like society, eh, there are a lot of factors that go into her being who she ended up being. And I think it is very, very nuanced. And then when you think about rooting for somebody who is traditionally unlikable, I suppose one could say, or would be, like, look at reality television, right?
Yeah.
Isn't
Yeah.
that literally what that industry is based on.
Absolutely. The Real Housewives.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I mean, so many of them are unlikable, and I actually do watch a few of those shows, and got a few ideas for Linda here and there from them. But it's interesting because I will see sometimes on various online forums people argue about liking one housewife more than the other, and I sort of think they're all kind of unlikable in various ways, but that's the fun of the show.
And you do, I think, like people do connect on, on some level, like sometimes I guess if you are finding somebody more sympathetic than somebody else, there is something there. And there is the whole cult of celebrity, which Linda very much buys into.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I have so many thoughts on the cult of celebrity myself,
Yeah.
and where I think all of that belongs. But it does very much sync up with this whole idea of Studio 54, where you could be, I don't know, like sharing cocaine with Mick Jagger and his wife. Like everybody who went there claims to have done that. And it's like, okay, but like, were you like just in the room with them? Or like, did you guys like hang out after, like it's just this like being near people
Yeah.
who have achieved things that you're either not going to achieve or that you want to achieve. And yeah, there are pockets, and especially like when Linda meets certain people where you do see where, had she just been steered in another direction, it didn't have to go this way.
Yeah, I mean, she's very smart. I think, part of what makes her voice work is that she's funny, she's smart. Some of her observations about others and about the world are spot on. She just can't see herself clearly. But getting back to Studio 54 a little bit, I did a lot of research on it, and when Steve Rubell and Ian Schrager created Studio 54, one of their goals was to have sort of, quote unquote, regular people kind of brushing up against celebrities. And I think that was supposed to be kind of part of the fun that the celebrities could go to a place where regular people would be, but they would not be accosted or treated like celebrities. And so from everything I've read, it was really common for people to like have a little moment, have a little moment in the bathroom with Liza Minnelli or whoever it was. And that was part of what fascinated me because I wondered, how many people actually took these encounters as meaning much more than they actually did? How many people walked away from that thinking, I'm kind of a celebrity myself because I brushed up against these people?
Definitely. And I feel like New York City in general like lends itself to that.
Absolutely. Yeah, because you see celebrities walking down the street and they really don't generally get accosted by people.
Yeah, definitely. And I will say there's something else that I just wanted to point out that I thought was very funny as somebody who grew up on Long Island, how when Linda talks about going to the city, it's capital, like
Yeah.
the is capitalized and city is
Mhm.
capitalized, because that is very much how it's all regarded.
Oh yeah. And to her it's the city, and there's a point in the book where she talks about lesser cities, and some of the cities she mentions are like really great large cities, but to her it's all the city, and it's New York. That's the only city that matters. And yeah, I think growing up in New Jersey, that was kind of very, at least in central Jersey, that was very much kind of our orientation as well.
This was super fun. This book was, like I said, it was very, very funny, and a bit tragic. And I think people are going to waver between like being like, oh my God, I can't stand her, to, like you said, rooting for her a bit too. I don't want to say much about what happened and the whole cycle because I do think that was part of the ride.
Yeah.
But did you have a favorite part of writing this?
Oh, that's interesting. Well, the first thing I'll say is that I wrote a lot of it during like the height of COVID. So it was this wonderful escape for me. I would slip into the 1970s. I would go into this much more frivolous time and headspace, and it was very good for my mental health to be kind of just channeling this crazy story that was set back in the 70s. Um, oh gosh, I really enjoyed writing. There are a few big scenes in the book that I really enjoyed writing. I think one was probably the scene at St. Mark's Church when they do the New Year's Day poetry reading. And because it's a scene where Linda could really figure out the way people see her, and it's like she almost gets it and she just turns away from it. And that was a lot of fun to write. And there's another scene in the poetry world that something like that happens where she is confronted with the fact that people don't respect her in that world. And the way she handles it, I don't condone who she is or how she behaves in general, but I truly feel there's something to admire in walking away with your head held high from humiliation. And it's something I really like about her. Like I sort of feel like we can all learn a little bit from her in terms of the way she just won't allow people to humiliate her. And I really love the way she walks away from that and does not take it in. I wish I could be more like that.
Are you working on a book after this? Are you like one of those authors who's like always writing?
I try to be. I will say that I'm a very slow writer compared to a lot of other authors I know. So I seem to be like sort of a book a decade kind of writer, which is not the greatest. But I am kind of just in the very beginning stages of a new book, and it's actually the first thing I've written that's set in Massachusetts, which is interesting because I've lived here um, off and on since the 80s. I came here for college and then I went back and forth a little bit, but I've lived in Massachusetts solidly since like the mid 90s. So, but I've never really set anything here before. So that's I think I finally had enough under my belt to be able to write something set here. But it's in its infancy right now.
Thank you so much. Check out Last Night at the Disco. It's like I said, wild ride. I think people are really going to enjoy it. So once again, this was Jessica with Syosset Libraries Turn the Page podcast. My guest was,
Lisa Borders.
and we are going to close this chapter.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.